Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Welcome to episode 3. And I'm joined by Dirk, who's got an amazing venture that he's going to tell us about today. Really inspiring. And as a just quick reminder, what the 15-minute challenge is about, it's about building a community of business owners, entrepreneurs, founders who are working to build organizations that are going to make an impact in the world. So a social good impact, an environmental good impact, etc. So creating this community, inspiring other people to join this community and build businesses and organizations that have this dual bottom line of not just profit, but also purpose, which is so much more important these days. It's a really clear thing that the world is shifting in this direction. So Dirk is someone who not just has created one of these, but is also inspiring and supporting other people who are creating these ventures. So without much more ado, I will introduce Dirk and tell us about what you do with Hatch and how you created it and what you guys do there.
Hi, all. Really good to be here on your podcast, and Thanks. Always very happy to share the work that we've been doing and also the work that's still ahead of us. So yeah, I'm CEO and founder of Hatch Enterprise. Hatch is an organization that supports specifically diverse founder, women, people from BAME communities, and also impact founders. And we support them into business from the very early stages, like let's say idea stage, into starting. People who have started, they're probably, let's say, between 6 and 12 months already on their journey to then help them to grow their business. And then founders who have grown their business already for about 2 to 3 years, we help them to figure out what scaling would look like. And yeah, in the last 6.5 years since we got going, we've worked with about 2,500 founders. And Wow. Of these 2,500, we've probably worked with about 450 for our really in-depth programs like our Launchpad, Incubator, and Accelerator programs, and about 2,000 for more light touch activities. We run events like all-day events. We run masterclasses. We have mentoring programs. So we differentiate a little bit between in-depth and kind of more light touch things. But right. Yeah, like entrepreneurship is what we do. And We've been loving it ever since.
And tell me about some of the businesses or organizations that you've helped launch.
So it's really diverse because we've not been looking at specific sectors. We've literally followed the demand of where people came to us from, and we've had some amazing businesses over the last few years. One of them, for example, is Change Please. They themselves are an impact business. And what they do is they help people who might be at risk of being homeless or even unemployed, and they help them by training them to become baristas. They started with a couple of coffee carts in London, but I think from what I know is they've now spread to Australia, to America. They've been selling their coffees at Sainsbury's. And everything is really to help address homelessness. And they've been one of the amazing businesses we've been working with. But there's also others. Out of the 450 businesses we've worked with more in depth, there is a lot of amazing businesses. But that's one that always stood out because of the mission to address homelessness, and then by selling a real product, coffee, and using that as the means for change.
Yeah, so there's lots of businesses that do things like that, like a Tony's Chocolonely is a Dutch example, which you might be familiar with. And these organizations demonstrate both being able to make social change, but also I assume they're profitable, they're doing well, they're raising money, they're growing internationally. So they're a good case study in that regard.
Absolutely, and there's many other ones. Like if you look at beer, for example, you've got Toast Ale that is upcycling or reusing, bread that would have otherwise, had to be thrown away. I think they're using that to make beer. You've got so many kind of product-based businesses, or businesses where you make your product and then either a proportion of the profits go to a social cause, or where the product itself is really alleviating a social cause. And I think it's we're only seeing the beginning of this now.
Yeah, so tell everyone more about the trend. So ESG, SRI, these are probably quite new terms to a lot of people. And the idea of a social business might even be quite a new term to people. So where are we at and where is it going?
Well, I'm hoping that the kind of business as usual is dead. And with coronavirus, we've all seen how the impact of not flying, not having to go to meetings, that's having a real impact on the planet around climate change, for example. I think air traffic is down from, I think, what it was like in the mid 2000s, or even before that.
Yeah.
And there's a real impact of people's behavior. But I think big businesses still have to change. And I think capitalism at large and business models that are extractive and where the externalities get outsourced and the environment has to bear it, or people have to bear it, where the business practices are exploitative, both environmentally or socially. More and more investors, you're talking pension funds, large asset managers, they're putting more and more pressure onto these large businesses. But then there's also the movement from the other side, where more and more founders want to start businesses that are impactful, either socially, environmentally, or both. And I think we're seeing more and more investments into ESG, environmental social governance, or SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And we're still really at the beginning of this whole shift. And we're hoping that there's much more coming over the next few years once money and business model find themselves.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting. After the last recession in 2008, there was a lot of people who were made redundant, unemployed, and they ended up starting. We saw a big growth in fintech, for example, in the London scene after the collapse of banking in 2008. We've now seen here through Corona that there's about 2-3 million people who've already become unemployed, and many more will come when the furlough scheme is over. A lot of those people will be looking to set up businesses. And I saw recently from the Patent Office that the number of patents filed in the last 2 months has skyrocketed. And so we're going to have a lot of people shifting into businesses. You see entrepreneurs go through the entrepreneurial journey all the time, and you've been through it yourself. So can you kind of shed some light about the journey and some of the challenges that you've personally had? What's been really difficult? I mean, let's not make this entrepreneurship this glamorous, idealized thing. There's real challenges, and it would be great to hear one or two from you.
Yeah, I mean, I originally come from Germany, and in Germany, not everybody goes to university. You have something called an apprenticeship. So for me, I looked at the first business that I was running from 2004 until 2013, even though it's 9 years, but I really saw this as my apprenticeship into business. I made so many mistakes, from hiring, from the way that we had structured our board of directors, from the way that we were running the business. I made so many mistakes in that. But then with the current business, which is now also my fifth business, fifth business and social enterprise / charity, you try to incorporate all the mistakes that you're making all the time, and building something better. So for me, this has been a 16-year-old journey so far. And I think the first kind of 5 to 10 years basically were spent, building a business, but also making mistakes and learning from them, or trying to learn from them as much as possible.
Okay. Go on. Sorry. Carry on.
Yeah, and the hardest thing is always making, and you've seen this now, so many businesses, I think it was over 70% of UK SMEs, small, medium-sized enterprises, only had 3 months of cash flow in their bank account.
Sure.
So very quickly you can see how you can see how that's going to affect them if there wasn't any support around and available. So for me, in the current business in our organization, we've always looked to have at least 12 months of cash flow in the bank account, or at least in secure contracts, just to be able to be more resilient and to be able to respond, as opposed to having to react frantically. And that's been something we've been measuring from day one. What do we have to do? How can we do it to continually extend our run rate and to have, obviously it doesn't always work to have 12 months. Sometimes you have to eat into that if you're expanding or if you're growing the team. But I think having a sensible enough buffer in your bank account or in contracts coming in is something that we worked really, really hard on for the last 6 years.
And just at this point, people watching on LinkedIn, we're going to transfer the rest of the conversation to YouTube because of the 10-minute limit on LinkedIn. But we've got another kind of 5-6 minutes with Dirk. So jump over to YouTube for the rest of the chat. But in terms of that lesson that you talk about regarding cash flow, was that because you had an experience where you just ran out of money and you just had to fold the business, or how was that lesson learned?
The lesson learned basically came from my grandparents, and
Okay.
they lived through the Second World War and then through the rebuilding efforts in Germany. And like their thing was always like to never have any debt and to never owe people money and to always be self-sufficient without having to go to somebody else to lend you money.
Right.
So essentially, not to live beyond your means. And that's something that I've personally always taken to heart. How can you build a business that is prosperous, but how can you also make sure that you're able to build a business that can survive the ups and downs? And there's many ups and downs. Like, we lost a lot of money at the very beginning of the coronavirus when it came around, because people, like, we had a contract and that got repurposed to grants to micro SMEs from a local council, and that was really difficult, but we completely understood where they were coming from. But for us that was a big shock, and if we didn't have the last 6 years of really working very hard to be a bit more sustainable, that could have cost us our business essentially. Yeah.
Right. Right.
So now that we're having more visibility on where things are going, we've been able to build new programs, raise more funds, even as Corona Challenge was going on. But it was really kind of doing this from the very get-go when you start your business. How can you make sure it's sustainable? How can you make sure that whatever money you have, you're putting some money away for a rainy day? It's critical.
So you're treating the business a bit more like a personal life finances, like how you would treat your own, your own spending.
It's important. I mean, I've still got to open my first credit card account. I still don't have one. Obviously, that's not, it's not to say that this is a sensible approach, because business is about investing, and we are making investment decisions all the time. We always invest in our staff, for example, where all of our staff members have a learning budget of between 400 and 800 pounds a year, and they can invest in themselves for that. So we're always investing. But I think what's really critical is just to always make sure you're self-sustaining and sufficient, especially in the early stages. Once you get growing, you will need investment or external finance maybe. Yeah? But I think the whole idea of bootstrapping and living within your means is something that I've been quite passionate about.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think lots of businesses take a completely different approach, and we've actually seen the challenges, especially during a crisis, where that approach has led to people going into administration. And so that's really interesting. Really interesting point, and very different to what a lot of people have been doing, and we've seen the results of it. I just want to move on for the final kind of couple of minutes to talk about your kind of mission. And what people can do to help with your mission. So, who's listening to this ideally, and what can they do to support the work that Hatch and Dirk does? What would that be?
Yeah, so we're looking to support about 10,000 founders by 2025. And these will be businesses, especially female-founded or female-led businesses, organizations that have an impact or have impact at their heart. And we're constantly looking for people who are either willing to help as a coach, as a consultant. They might be able to help one of our ventures with connections or network, or they might have a couple of spare hours every month, either because their employer gives it to them as part of their skilled volunteering. So we're always looking for financial coaches, amazing business mentors, people who have been running a business and to then want to mentor somebody else. I think it's extremely powerful.
Yeah.
And that's something that we're always on the lookout for. And because, if we're looking for 10,000 founders to work with, we're equally looking for another 10,000 financial coaches and mentors to work with.
Wow, that's a huge undertaking, isn't it?
Well, we've done two and a half in the last couple of years, but just this year with coronavirus, we've got a specific program to support 1,500 businesses. and we've already worked with over 300 in the last 2 months.
Wow.
So we're scaling our support, and especially what we've come to realize is once everything has moved online, you can get to scale much more quickly through your support programs, and that's been really amazing. Like it's definitely accelerated our learning tremendously.
That's fascinating. So with that shift to online, what does the future look like for Hatch? What's a global domination? What's a world where you guys have been as successful as you can possibly imagine? What does that look like?
Well, currently we're building our first investment fund. So contrary to most other investors or people in this space, we didn't start with a fund. We started with an enterprise program first. So now that we've tested our program for the last 6 years, or we've tested multiple programs from incubator to accelerator, mentoring only, financial coaching, all the rest of it, we've got a good understanding of what that looks like. Now we're launching our 10 million social impact and investment fund. And because we think that bringing the support and the finance together will be really critical for entrepreneurs, so they don't have to shop around and run around for everything, but they can get this under one roof. So I think that's something that's going to happen more and more in the future, where impact funds are being established. Money is going into the sectors to address the sustainable development goals, either narrowly within one, for example. It could be inequality, or it could be more broadly across some of them. But I think we're seeing a shift towards ESGs and SDGs going forward, and we're definitely part and parcel of it, as are so many others. And I think collaborating, working together, sharing data, figuring out what works and how it can work better, I think is really critical.
Wow. So you're raising a 10 million fund as we speak to support these entrepreneurs. That's huge. That's phenomenal. And how are you doing with the raise at the moment?
We've got soft commitments of between $1 million and $2 million already. So we're currently going through due diligence with our investors, who we have worked with for about 12 months now. So we're going through due diligence, and then we think in quarter 3, 4, we will continue with our fundraising, because things have been on pause and on hold at the moment.
Sure.
But with the first 2 investors, really close to securing funds from them, that's the most important, because then the hat is no longer empty, and then we can get going with our first deployment to the first 20 businesses essentially.
Wow, that's phenomenal. Huge ambition, and phenomenal work that you do. So we've come to the end of our 15 minutes, and I've got to stick to my time, as I've been going over every week. But it feels like we could carry on this conversation for quite a while longer. But it's phenomenal work that you do, and I really urge anybody who's either an entrepreneur, is looking to finance these businesses, that looks like there's a fund being set up. So if you want to invest in that kind of business, there's a route there, but also there's space for a lot of entrepreneurs that Dirk and Hatch are looking to support. So it sounds like an amazing program to support entrepreneurs, and I strongly, I've had a few conversations with Dirk already, and looked into the program myself, and it looks fantastic. So I can highly recommend. I'll post the link down in the comments, and hopefully get in touch with Dirk directly as well. I'll tag him in the LinkedIn post. So best of luck, Dirk. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Speak to you soon. Take care.
Thanks.